others.
I have.
But still on his feet and elated, though breathing hard. "Baby brother still has much to learn," taunted Federico, setting off again, a darting shadow among the chimney stacks under the scattering of clouds. Ezio hurled himself forward, lost in the wildness of the moment. Other abysses yawned beneath him, some defining mere alleyways, others broad thoroughfares. Federico was nowhere to be seen. Suddenly, the tower of Santa Trinita rose before him, rising from the red sweep of the church's gently sloping roof. But as he approached, he remembered that the church stood in the center of a square, and that the distance between its roof and those of the surrounding buildings was far greater than any he had yet leapt. He dared not hesitate or lose speed now. His only hope was that the church roof was lower than the one he would have to jump from. If he could throw himself forward with enough force and truly launch himself into the air, gravity would do the rest. For 1 or 2 seconds, he would fly like a bird. He forced any thought of the consequences of failure out of his mind. The edge of the roof he was on approached fast, and then nothing. He soared, listening to the air whistle in his ears, bringing tears into his eyes. The church roof seemed an infinite distance away. He would never reach it. He would never laugh or fight or hold a woman in his arms again. He couldn't breathe. He shut his eyes. And then his body bent double. He was steadying himself with his hands and feet, but they were supported again. He had made it, within inches of the edge, but he had made it onto the church roof. But where was Federico? Ezio clambered up to the base of the tower and turned to look back the way he had come, just in time to see his brother flying through the air himself. Federico landed firmly, but his weight sent 1 or 2 of the red clay tiles slithering out of place, and he almost lost his footing as the tiles slid down the roof and off the edge, shattering a few seconds later on the hard cobbles far below. But Federico had found his balance again, and he stood up, panting for shore, but with a broad, proud smile on his face. "Not such a Tartaruga after all," he said as he came up and clapped Ezio on the shoulder. "You went past me like greased lightning." "I didn't even know that I had," said Ezio briefly, trying to catch his breath. "Well, you won't beat me up to the top of the tower," retorted Federico, pushing Ezio to the side, and he started to clamber up the squat tower which the city fathers were thinking of replacing with something of a more modern design. This time, Federico made it first, and even had to give a hand up to his wounded brother, who was beginning to feel that bed would be no bad thing. They were both out of breath, and stood while they recovered to look out over their city, serene and silent in the oyster light of dawn. "It is a good life we lead, brother," said Federico with uncharacteristic solemnity. "The best," Ezio agreed, "and may it never change." They both paused, neither wishing to break the perfection of the moment. But after a while, Federico quietly spoke. "May it never change us, either, Fratellino. Come, we must get back. There is the roof of our palazzo. Pray God Father hasn't stayed up all night, or we really will be for it. Let's go." He made for the edge of the tower in order to climb back down to the roof, but stopped when he saw that Ezio had remained where he was. "What is it?" "Wait a minute." "What are you looking at?" said Federico, rejoining him. He followed Ezio's gaze, and then his face broke out into a grin. "You sly devil! You're not thinking of going there now, are you? Let the poor girl sleep." "No, I think it's time Cristina woke up." Ezio had met Cristina Calfucci only a short time before, but already they seemed inseparable. despite the fact that their parents still deemed them too young to form a serious alliance. Ezio disagreed, but Christina was only 17, and her parents expected Ezio to rein in his wild habits before they would even begin to look more kindly on him. Of course, this only served to make him more impetuous. Federico and he had been lounging in the main market after buying some trinkets for their sister's Saint's Day, watching the pretty girls of the town with their accompagnatrice as they flitted from stall to stall, examining lace here, ribbons, and bolts of silk there. But one girl had stood out from her companions, more beautiful and graceful than anyone Ezio had ever seen before. Ezio would never forget that day, the day on which he had first set eyes on her. "Oh," he had gasped involuntarily. "Look, she is so beautiful." "Well," said his ever-practical brother, "why don't you go over and say hello?" "What?" Ezio was shocked. "And after I've said hello, what then?" "Well, you could try talking to her. What you bought, what she's bought, it doesn't matter. You see, little brother, most men are so afraid of beautiful girls that anyone who actually plucks up the courage to have a chat stands at an immediate advantage." "What? You think they don't want to be noticed? They don't want to enjoy a little conversation with a man? Of course they do. Anyway, you're not bad looking, and you are an auditore. So, go for it, and I'll distract the chaperone. Come to think of it, she's not so bad looking herself." Ezio remembered how, left alone with Christina, rooted to the spot, at a loss for words, drinking in the beauty of her dark eyes, her long, soft auburn hair, her tip-tilted nose. She stared at him. "What is it?" she asked. "What do you mean?" he blurted out. "Why are you just standing there?" "Oh, because I wanted to ask you something." "And what might that be?" "What's your name?" She rolled her eyes. Damn, he thought, she's heard it all before. "Not one you'll ever need to make use of," she said, and off she went. Ezio stared after her for a moment, then set off after her. "Wait," he said, catching up, more breathless than if he'd run a mile. "I wasn't ready. I was planning on being really charming and suave and witty. Won't you give me a second chance?" She looked back at him without breaking her stride, but she did give him the faintest trace of a smile. Ezio had been in despair, but Federico had been watching and called to him softly. "Don't give up now. I saw her smile at you. She'll remember you." Taking heart, Ezio had followed her, discreetly, taking care she wouldn't notice. 3 or 4 times he had to dart behind a market stall or, after she had left the square, duck into a doorway, but he'd managed to tail her pretty successfully right up to the door of her family mansion, where a man he recognized had blocked her path. Ezio had drawn back. Christina looked at the man angrily. "I've told you before, Vieri, I'm not interested in you. Now let me pass." Ezio, concealed, drew in a breath. Vieri de Pazzi. Of course.
What's going on?
"But, signorina, I am interested. Very interested indeed," said Vieri. "Then join the queue." She tried to get past him, but he moved in front of her. "I don't think so, amore mio. I've decided that I'm tired of waiting for you to open your legs of your own volition." And he seized her roughly by the arm, drawing her close, putting his other arm round her as she struggled to get free. "I'm not sure you're getting the message," said Ezio suddenly, stepping forward and looking Vieri in the eye. "Ah, the little auditore whelp, cane rognoso. What the hell do you have to do with this? To the devil with you!" "And buongiorno to you too, Vieri. I'm so sorry to intrude, but I have the distinct impression that you're spoiling this young lady's day." "Oh, you do you? Excuse me, my dearest, while I kick the stuffing out of this parvenu." With that, Vieri had thrust Cristina aside and lunged at Ezio with his right fist. Ezio parried easily and stepped aside, tripping Vieri as the momentum of his attack carried him forward, sending him sprawling in the dust. "Had enough, friend?" said Ezio mockingly, but Vieri was on his feet in an instant and came towards him in a rage, fists flailing. He'd got one hard blow into the side of Ezio's jaw, but Ezio warded off a left hook and got two of his own in, one to the stomach and, as Vieri bent double, another to his jaw. Ezio had turned to Cristina to check that she was all right. Winded, Vieri backed off, but his hand flew to his dagger. Cristina saw the movement and gave an involuntary cry of alarm as Vieri brought the dagger plunging down towards Ezio's back. But, warned by the cry, Ezio had turned in the nick of time and seized Vieri firmly by the wrist, wrenching the dagger away from him. It fell to the ground. The two young men stood face to face, breathing hard. "Is that the best you can do?" Ezio said through gritted teeth. "Shut your mouth, or by God I'll kill you." Ezio laughed. "I suppose I shouldn't be surprised to see you trying to force yourself on a nice girl who clearly thinks you're a complete ball of dung, given the way your papa tries to force his banking interests on Florence. You fool! It's your father who needs to be taught a lesson in humility. It's time you patsy stopped slandering us, but then you're all mouth and no fist." Vieri's lip was bleeding badly. He wiped it with his sleeve. "You'll pay for this, you and your whole breed. I won't forget this, Auditore." He spat at Ezio's feet, stooped to retrieve his dagger, then turned and ran. Ezio had watched him go. He remembered all this, standing there on the church tower and looking across at Cristina's house. He remembered the elation he'd felt as he'd turned back to Cristina and seen a new warmth in her eyes as she'd thanked him. "Are you all right, signorina?" he'd said. "I am now, thanks to you." She'd hesitated, her voice still trembling with fear. "You asked me my name. Well, it's Cristina. Cristina Calfucci." Ezio bowed. "I am honored to meet you, Signorina Cristina. Ezio Auditore. Do you know that man?" "Vieri? Our paths have crossed now and then, but our families have no reason to like one another." "I never want to see him again." "If I can help it, you won't." She smiled shyly, then said, "Ezio, you have my gratitude, and because of it, I am prepared to give you a second chance after that bad start." She laughed gently, then kissed him on the cheek before disappearing into her mansion. The small crowd that had inevitably gathered had given Ezio a round of applause. He had bowed smilingly, but as he'd turned away, he'd known that he might have made a new friend, but he had also made an implacable enemy. "Let Cristina sleep," Federico said again, drawing Ezio back from his reverie. "Time enough for that later," he replied. "I must see her." "All right, if you must. I'll try to cover for you with father. But watch yourself. Vieri's men may still be about." With that, Federico shinned down the tower to the roof and bounded off that into a hay wagon parked in the street which led home. Ezio watched him go, then decided to emulate his brother. The hay wain looked very far below him, but he remembered what he'd been taught, controlled his breathing, calmed himself, and concentrated. Then he flew into the air, taking the greatest leap of his life so far. For an instant, he thought he might have misjudged his aim, but he calmed his own momentary panic and landed safely in the hay. A true leap of faith. A little breathless, but exhilarated at his success, Ezio swung himself into the street. The sun was just appearing over the eastern hills, but there were still very few people about. Ezio was just about to start off in the direction of Christina's mansion when he heard echoing footsteps, and desperately trying to conceal himself, he shrank into the shadows of the church porch and held his breath. It was none other than Vieri and two of the Pazzi guards who rounded the corner. "We'd better give up, Chief," said the senior guard. "They've long gone by now." "I know they're here somewhere," snapped Vieri. "I can practically smell them." He and his men made a circuit of the church square, but showed no sign of moving on. The sunlight was shrinking the shadows. Ezio cautiously crept into the shelter of the hay again and lay there for what seemed an age, impatient to be on his way. Once Vieri passed so close that Ezio could practically smell him, but at last he motioned his men with an angry gesture to move on. Ezio lay still for a while longer, then climbed down and let out a long sigh of relief. He dusted himself off and quickly covered the short distance that separated him from Christina, praying that no one in her household would yet be stirring. The mansion was still silent, though Ezio guessed that servants would be preparing the kitchen fires at the back. He knew which Christina's window was and threw a handful of gravel up at her shutters. The noise seemed deafening, and he waited, heart in mouth. Then the shutters opened and she appeared on the balcony. Her nightdress revealed the delicious contours of her body as he gazed up at her. He was at once lost in desire. "Who is it?" she called softly. He stood back so she could see him. "Me." Christina sighed, though in a not unfriendly way. "Ezio, I might have known. May I come up, mia Colomba?" She glanced over her shoulder before answering in a whisper. "All right, but just for a minute." "That's all I need." She grinned. "Indeed?" He was confused. "No, sorry, I didn't mean it quite like that. Let me show you." Looking round himself to make sure the street was still deserted, he gained a foothold in one of the large iron rings set into the grey stonework of the house for tethering horses, and hoisted himself up, finding relatively easy handholds and footholds in the rusticated masonry. In 2 winks of an eye, he had hoisted himself over the balustrade, and she was in his arms.
I knew this day would come. Please, show mercy.